Alright, welcome to another painting tutorial. This one we're going to look at Smaug. So I mostly airbrushed this model and then went back and did some painting by hand. So here you can see the finished out result. It's hard to find good, well-lit reference photos apart from the GW ones, but I looked around and I mean this is sort of what I came up with. There's no real right way, I guess, to paint Smaug. But I guess the GW one, they probably had good reference stuff. So basically I started out spray painting everything black. I did some partial assemblies here. You can check out my assembly video to see why I did what. So I'm starting with Angelic Blood. I'm using all Badger Minotaur paints for this with the airbrushing, and then for painting by hand I'm using GW paints. So yeah, I got the whole set of Minotaur paints. I like them. You can use them straight out of the bottle. And just trying to learn how they work on things. So painting reds over top of blacks isn't the greatest, but you build up the colors layer by layer. So what I'm doing there is just building up the Angelic Blood sort of color. Okay, so the base, putting some base colors on there, and what I'm doing is I'm building up some of the darker copper tones on everything, and I'm going to build up to like bright gold on some of the raised areas. So over top of that copper, I'm putting antique gold, and you just kind of see I'm trying to do more of a directional spray, so straight down on it. And then when I go up to the next gold, which is coming in a second here, there we go, noble gold. So that's just going to go on some of the bright, very front areas, that sort of thing. Just trying to keep that to a minimum, just so that it gets a bit more of the sparkle going. So the rest of the details on there I'll paint by hand, but that gives me a head start on all the gold. And so the black kind of shows through a little bit on all the shaded areas. Dark leather here for the underhide. So all the scales here, I'm kind of just base coating this with this color, and I'm going to do a lighter flesh tone sort of thing later on. So as you can see, I left the wings off for this portion. Once I get closer to the end of the painting, I glued the wings on. I did magnetize them, thinking that maybe I'd want to keep them off, but in the end I decided I wanted everything glued. Going over the black scales on the back with some Raven Black. I do this later on. I touch this all up by hand, so this black undercoat kind of helps speed up things later on. It helps transition to the red. You don't want to, at least I didn't want I didn't want too harsh of lines with the black, so this just helps blend it in a little bit with the red, but it's still going to have some distinct black areas. Okay, so here's what the model looks like for now. So I've got some red base coats on there, some of the black, some of the browns underneath the underhide. The wing glued on at this point. I'm just kind of sitting them there with the magnets, and gives you an idea of the size. So it's a huge model. Those little claws at the end of the wingtips are a bit fiddly and a bit annoying. I did break a couple off and had to glue them back on. Going with Nebula Red, so building up the red highlights on all of the skin bits. So I tend to show more of the head because it's easier to hold in front of the camera. But I'm doing basically the same thing with the rest of the model. And for some reason my camera decided to focus on the background. So yeah, sorry about that. Also, halfway through painting this, I noticed a couple more of the joints that I didn't really like, so I went back and I touched those up a little bit and had to touch up some of the paint. So one of the joints on the tail was a bit too obvious. Wasn't really obvious until I started laying on paint. Okay, moving on to Scorching Red. So yeah, as the paint kind of went on, I kind of saying, you know, this is a bit too obvious, so I got to go back and touch that up. So I did that with a little green, liquid green stuff and that sort of thing. Also, when I put the wings on, I added a bit more filler in between the gaps. Still not perfect, but still, you know, reasonably happy with the result. I guess you could always spend more time fixing up that kind of stuff, but at some point you got to move on. So as you can see, I'm just building up the yellow, the orangey red highlights on all the raised bits, and I'm going to do the same thing with basically the rest of the model. Alright, so now we're looking at the rest of the neck there, and so I try to touch up those all those wrinkles and try to get little bits of highlights on there. But I'm mostly relying on the size of the model to kind of show that. I'm just trying to bring out a little bit of that with the airbrush, but for the most part, yeah, it's it's just kind of putting on a base coat, and because the airbrush goes on so thin, you can see a lot of the colors underneath, and so you rely a lot on the texture when you're dealing with the airbrush, at least on a model like this. And then there's plenty of amazing texture on it. You can tell it was 3D printed and then touched up, at least some large sections of it, so that would have helped the design process. Humanoid Flesh, so this is kind of like an over highlight, and I'll bring this back down with some thinner colors later. So I'm kind of using this Humanoid Flesh on all the sharp edges of the face here, and I'll do that on the same sort of thing with the underhide, so the part that I did the brown on, and then all the highlighting on the wings and that sort of thing with the same sort of idea. It kind of over highlights it, and then with a sort of a transparent layer over top, it'll bring it back down a little bit. It's the same idea as for like Blood Angel Space Marines, putting on sort of the bright or the light brown for edge highlighting. It kind of goes nicely with the red without being too orange. Okay, so this step here you can kind of skip. I tried doing a Ghost Tint Magenta over top of my previous highlights, but it turned out looking too purple, and so I didn't really like that. So I basically paint over this all later. But it was a good learning experience for me to see what that would do. So I'm going back now with Scorching Red and kind of retouching that up. So some of the ghost tint would be still slightly visible in some of the areas, so that adds a little bit of depth to the model. But overall, I probably could have just skipped that step. I mean, that's one of the things with using all the different colors of paint, is that it adds more depth and sort of more character to the model. So it's never a bad thing to add more steps. It just takes more time and it's not as efficient. So it's always trying to find that balance. Okay, Warning Yellow now on the wings. So this one here you can see is done, or partially done, and I'm just adding more of that. So really trying to bring up the highlights on the wings here. And again, I kind of over highlight this, and I'll bring that back down again later on. So I'm using the sort of the direction of the way I'm holding the airbrush to give me some of the highlights that I want, and so that'll naturally leave some shading below the folds. And then I don't show it, but one of the steps I did like a dark brown and reshaded those the wing areas. So here we are with this now. It's a bit more yellow than I like, but it's starting to shape up, coming together quite nicely. You can kind of see what it looks like on the base there. I think it's really important for a model of this size to kind of get perspective, you know, going back and taking a look at things. Okay, so doing some purple shading in around the eyes, and not a lot of this, but doing the tongue and basically around the eyes. I guess I could have done this some other areas too, but I think that's all I really did. Now, of course, when I painted this model, I did it over many nights, kind of stealing away a little bit of time here and there. Here's Demonic Skin, so nice bright pinkish purple. Just slight highlights, doing very little of that. Yeah, so it took me a long time. It's kind of end of March, and I finished this up. I started obviously, well, not obviously, but I started around Christmas when it came out, and then I was just trying to find time around then. Okay, so Charred Stone, going over the black base coat, and just try to give a bit of tonal variation on here. I'm going to give this another highlight airbrush. And then off camera, I do a touch of dry brushing just to bring out some of the edges. So the nice thing about doing a couple tones with the airbrush is it gives you a bit more depth, and then when you do a dry brush, you just get the slight edges, and I don't know, it's a nice look that's pretty easy to get done. So badger fur highlighting. So just trying to pick up some of the raised areas, and yeah, it's a pretty quick way to get these things painted up. So combining techniques, you can always add washes to get some different tones in there if you wanted greens for like sort of algae and that. I've done that with other stuff, not with this, but yeah, you can add some different layers in there, and it's pretty quick once you have the base coat done with the airbrush. Alright, so now moving over to Raven Black. So retouching up some of the spines and stuff on this. I mentioned that I do all these spines kind of by hand again later, so I paint them all black, and then I dry brush them a little bit with some gray blues just to give them a bit of their own character. So doing the base coat with the airbrush helps speed that process up and gives me a bit of transition to the next color. Okay, so Dryad Bark and some other colors on this base here. So just painting on some other colors so that these things look semi-realistic. I'm just showing the base colors. I won't show the whole process. You kind of get the idea though of just picking out all the different details. And I'm going to do a shade and highlight of them later. But the idea is I don't want to draw too much attention to them, but you also have to have kind of the right amount of detail. These things wouldn't look right if they're all gold. Okay, so black for all those trunks, lead belcher for some of the shields and some of the armor bits that are sitting on there. Yeah, just trying to make sure that I have all the bits covered. Some helmets, some dwarven armor and all that sort of thing. Warplock Bronze, I use that for, which part did I use that for? For all the trunks here. So they're going to get sort of a bronzy look. And not too worried about getting this exactly right, but just so on quick glance it all looks like it's proper. Screaming Bell, so this is going to be the base for copper, and copper is going to be all these flasks or whatever they are, jugs of some sort. And so there's what it looks like before any shading. So it's obviously way too bright and kind of gaudy looking. So some Agrax Earthshade on any of the brownish stuff. And some Nuln Oil will go on the silver bits. And that just kind of brings everything down a touch. There we go, Nuln Oil. And when I do the highlights, I don't. I only do one layer of highlights. I don't want things to be too bright compared to the gold. Nihilakh Oxide for all the copper things, so that nice brings those things down nicely. I did a little bit of Agrax Earthshade in the openings at the top just to make it look like it was a full jug sort of a thing. Kind of the illusion of some shadow in there. Otherwise, it looks a little bit off when it's just that oxide sort of look there. So that's after this step I add some of those things. And of course I'm going to highlight those and yeah, that's it. Okay, some Zandri Dust for the teeth here. So there's not a lot of bone colored things. I mean, arguably his teeth seems kind of odd. Sorry, it's off camera, but it'll come back. It's kind of odd that the teeth are one color and his claws and stuff are another, but that's the way I painted it. So yeah, putting some of the details on the teeth there. I'm going to wash them with some Agrax Earthshade. Now the eyes, Averland Sunset. Now, I probably should have drawn the pupils on and stuff, but I don't. I still haven't painted up Bilbo, so maybe if I ever do him and put him on the base, then I'll do a couple more of those details. Ushabti Bone for the teeth here. So just quickly doing those, trying to avoid the base of them, trying to work it up towards the top as if they've been kind of worn clean from all the dwarves he's eaten. And some Screaming Skull highlights on those. Very quick for that last highlight. Okay, so now I'm putting some Regal Red back on those wings to bring them back into the right sort of a tone. And adding a bit of variation, some vein sort of patterns to them. I also do add some veins with a brown before I add a bit more reds, and I shade those a little bit. So kind of a veiny pattern on those wings. You'll see that in some of the close-ups. There's lots of great close-up pictures on my website. It's like watching paint dried.blogspot.com. And yeah, there's the finished Smaug. So he's not quite glued onto the base, but he sits nicely on there. I used a hairdryer to sort of mold them onto there just a little bit. So there's a little bit of misalignment after everything was glued. So using a hairdryer after glued helped make sure everything just worked out perfectly. Yeah, so an amazing model, lots of great detail. Airbrushing, I can't imagine doing it by hand. It would just take way too long for all the amount of detail, and trying to get all those layers blended nicely. It would be crazy to try to do that. So if anybody's done that, kudos to them. There's a look at some of the wings and the details there. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to check out my other stuff. If you have any questions about airbrushing a model like this, or any of the details that I might have skipped on the video, please leave a question. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to check out everything else and subscribe for more videos. See you next time.